Greetings and welcome to The Dividing Line, back here in Phoenix after a quick trip back east. Mainly going to be home for a while. I have one little trip to California to do in a few weeks. But man, it's been crazy, and it's good to be back here. I want to jump right into it because I want to need to try to limit it today to an hour, especially in light of the commentary from the Federalist. Did you see the? There was. I think it was the Federalist that had an article about must listen to theological podcasts, which included The Briefing, The Line of Fire. There are a couple I did not recognize because they went off in other areas, but we got mentioned right in the middle of all that. Along with the line, sometimes tends to be a little long. And yeah, we are a little bit longer than most of the others. I mean, the briefing's normally less than half an hour. It used to be less than 20 minutes. Now it's about 25, 27 most of the time. Anyway, so I guess we need to get done in an hour at least from that perspective. But I have some other things got to run and do. We're going to do another program tomorrow as well. So there you go. I again had time on the plane to do some reading and ran across someone just posted the article in the chat channel if anybody wants to look at that for today, May 15th. Provocative Substantive Theology Podcast Need Check. That's not the title, obviously, that's the URL, but I suppose I could see if it pops up here quick enough, and I can give you a little. Why is Chrome doing that? I don't know why Chrome is doing that. This is Holly Shear. 7 provocative substantive theology podcasts you need to check out. Ask Pastor John, The Briefing, The Dividing Line is number 3. Episodes are on the long side, coming in around 90 minutes or longer. So we need to be less than that. What can I say? Issues, etc. Line of Fire. Even Michael Heiser got in there. And Michael Heiser, we're gonna have to do some more. I'm gonna have to do some more. It looks like he's getting into some more weird stuff. He's been in for a while, but I've had his anti-Calvinist comments on this computer for over a year, and I don't know why I haven't gotten around to it. But anyway, so yeah, you can find that on the Federalist today if you want to check that out. As I said, I had some time on planes once again, and in the process ran across the discussion of the true conjectural emendation that is found in the Textus Receptus at Luke 2:22. Now, this is a text that I have made reference to a number of times in the past. In fact, if I am recalling correctly, I didn't take time to look, but if I am recalling correctly, I attempted to get Doug Wilson to talk about this in our original credenda agenda debate thingy, Bobby, we did, I don't know how long ago. And I think that was sort of when he said, well, we don't need to get into the details type of situation. I don't remember if it came up in the book thing we did. But anyway, Luke 2:22 says, and when the days of their purification according to the law of Moses were completed, they brought him up to Jerusalem to present him to the Lord. I suppose context is always good. And when 8 days had passed, Luke 2:21, before his circumcision, his name was then called Jesus, the name given by the angel before he was conceived in the womb. And when the days of their purification, according to the law of Moses, were completed, they brought him up to Jerusalem to present him to the Lord. As it is written in the law of the Lord, every firstborn male that opens the womb shall be called holy to the Lord, and to offer a sacrifice according to what was said in the law of the Lord, a pair of turtle doves or 2 young pigeons. And that's when they encounter Simeon, to whom the Lord had revealed certain things, and you have his song and so on and so forth. So the issue is that in the King James and the Textus Receptus, well, because it's in the Textus Receptus in the King James, it says, and when the days of her purification according to the law of Moses were completed. And modern translations say their purification. Now, I have discussed this in my book for a number of years. I even gave a note in my book to Dr. D.A. Waite, and his assertion that if you read as the modern translations and modern Greek texts read, that you are accusing Jesus of being a sinner. Because if they're going to the temple and the offering the sacrifices, that would mean Jesus had to be a sinner, which of course would also mean because Jesus was baptized in the Jordan by John, they had to be a sinner too. It's a vacuous argument, but it's out there. People make that kind of argumentation. Once again, the key issue is, what did Luke write? Or is that the key issue? For those, I would argue that for those presenting the TR as the confessional text, pretending, and I do believe it is pretense, pretending to do confessional textual criticism when you're not doing any criticism at all, you can't, by definition. For these individuals, this is a very, very problematic text. And for these individuals, it doesn't matter what Luke wrote. Doesn't matter. If you make the TR the standard, then you need to do that on a theological basis, and you need to say that's what God wants us to have. And so we can't know and don't need to know and don't need to worry about knowing what Luke originally wrote. We have the Textus Receptus, and that's that. Now, there's all sorts of ramifications to this, which I've been trying to point out to people for a long time now, but that's the situation I think you find yourself in. So what about it? I mean, on the simple level of, well, it would sound nicer if it said her purification. How did it get there? What is the evidence? Well, the reality is that this is yet another example of where you have to use a unique set of arguments if you are a TR-only representative. You have to use a unique set of arguments to substantiate this one particular reading that you will never, ever, 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 ever use for any other reading anywhere else in the TR. Just as it's a unique set at Revelation 16:5, it's a unique set at Revelation 14:1, it's a unique set of arguments in Luke 2:22. Every time we go over this, what you discover is that which manuscripts you privilege, which manuscripts you give the greatest weight to, will change from argument to argument to argument to argument. Because you're not doing criticism, you're doing traditional defense. You have a traditional text, you're defending it, and you have to use different arguments for each of the unique readings. There is no one consistent system. That's why, despite Gene Kim's incredibly childish haranguing, he never understood the challenge that I made. And that challenge has yet to be met as far as I have any knowledge of. And I do not believe it can be met. And that is, to those who promote the TR, give us a consistent textual critical methodology when applied to the current manuscript tradition would derive the Textus Receptus, the readings of the TR, as it exists today, as is reflected in the translation of the King James Version of the Bible. Can't be done. It's simply impossible. And that's the error of your system. You can continue to believe it all you want. You can, pretend that you feel good about it or whatever. But it's untenable on a truth level. And that should be the level that we are most concerned about. So what does the majority text read at Luke 2:22? Well, it says their purification. Their purification. That is the specific reading. And when you look at the Nestle-Aland apparatus, the only variant that is noted is the reading of the autou instead of autone, the singular instead of the plural. In Codex Beza Cantabrigiensis, the translation that was that we call the Living Bible of the early church, that Beza did have access to himself, Beza being Calvin's successor at Geneva, his 1598 edition of the Greek New Testament being extremely heavily weighted by the King James translators. I think, I could be wrong about this, but I'm pretty certain that the 1598 Beza is the most like the TR of any of the printed texts that were used to create the TR. So in other words, all of Beza's previous editions, all of Robert Estienne Stephanus's editions, and all of Erasmus's editions. I think the 1598 is the one they used most often. But there are variants from even that. So Codex D has autou. There are other Latin manuscripts, the Sinaitic Syriac, and a few Sahidic manuscripts that likewise have the singular masculine, but none that have autes, which is the reading of the TR. Now, I was in the research that I did years ago, 25 years ago this year. Wow, that's hard to believe. No way, 20? Yeah, that's 25 years ago. Yeah. I just need to buy a big bottle of Geritol, just have it sitting in here, you know? It's just, 25 years ago, I did track down one minuscule, number 76, that had autes. But the point is, if you are a majority text advocate, there's only one answer to the reading here, and it's autone, their purification. And the specific manuscripts that you will use, well, let me back up. There's no evidence that Beza had access to any Greek manuscripts that said autes. He was following what's called the Complutensian polyglot, which, as we know, was actually printed prior to Erasmus, but not published till years after Erasmus's initial edition. And Erasmus has autone. He has the reading of the Greek manuscripts at this place. So here you have Beza following the Roman Catholic collation, and really giving a lot of weight to the Latin Vulgate at this point. Now, once again, we've been looking at commentary on the subject from Jan Kranz, and he gives us a citation from Beza. You'll see what the relevance of all this is. Hold on. Typical is also Beza's adoption of the reading autes instead of autone, Luke 2:22. He writes, of Mary, autes in the Vulgate, use of him, her, apparently of Mary, for it is proper to fulfill the law, although Mary after Christ's birth would be all the more sanctified. Now that's Calvin's successor at Geneva saying that. In any case, we have expressed the antecedent itself in full in order to avoid any ambiguity. Most manuscripts, codices, have autone, and thus Origen reads also, followed by Erasmus. But here's what Beza says. But I fail to see how this could fit, while the law of purification only concerns the mother. And so I prefer to follow the old edition, the Vulgate, with which the Complutensian edition agrees. In 1582, Beza adds an explanation of the textual corruption as he sees it. The textual corruption. The TR guys will accuse me and modern textual critics of talking about corruption. And yet Beza, B-E-Z-A, Beza, yeah, him, the successor of Calvin, speaks of textual corruption in these words, quote, "Indeed, most probably, the true scripture has been corrupted." And why am I emphasizing that? Because just a few months ago, I listened to a podcast that Dr. Riddle did, where he spent a lot of time talking about the title of Metzger's book, Restoration, the Corruption and Restoration in the Text of the New Testament. And these guys actually think, they really think, we don't believe the text has been corrupted. We believe God has preserved it. We don't believe in corruption. But we use a text that was collated and created by Erasmus and Beza, both of whom believe that it had been, talked about it, and even made changes based upon their theory of it. But let's not worry about that. Guys, you can't hold this position and keep a straight face. That's why I said this book is such a one-volume destruction of your position. You can't do it. Anyways, indeed, quoting Beza again, "Indeed, most probably the true scripture has been corrupted by those who dreamt of diminishing Mary's holiness to some degree in this way." Now, I always get really nervous when I see people fiddling with the text based upon what they are speculating somebody in the past might have been thinking. Because I don't know what people in the past were thinking, and guess what? Neither do you. And so when you start playing around with the text based upon your speculations, it reminds me of, when we had a discussion a number of years ago about the pericope adultery, the story of the woman taken in adultery in John 7:53 through 8:11. Augustine's comment was brought up that he theorized that had been deleted by people, by certain manuscripts, that had been deleted by people, and he theorized it was because they wanted to have a less stringent, or that they were scandalized by Jesus' less stringent law that allowed the adulteress to live, as if he could have any idea what someone's speculation might be. The reality was that the manuscripts, all the manuscripts we have before Beza Canterbury-Jansen's do not contain it. That particular reading in John 7:53 through 8:11. So anyway, so here's Beza. And most probably the true scripture has been corrupted by those who dreamt of diminishing Mary's holiness to some degree in this way. So he goes with a reading not found in any Greek manuscript he possesses, but only found in the Complutensian Polyglot. Now, how many places would you have to change in the TR if you used that argumentation consistently across the text of the New Testament? But you don't, and you won't, and you can't. That's the point. That's the point. So this annotation, and especially the 1582 addition, is exemplary of Beza's approach towards the text. In this case, the Greek text was changed from auton into autes, and for the translation, even Maria of Mary was adopted. So Mary's name was inserted. It is, however, not a conjecture, for as Beza indicates expressly, he follows the choice, actually the conjecture, made by the Complutensian editors, which reflects the Vulgate. Beza's choice of reading was to be influential, as it was followed by the Elsevier editions and by both the Geneva Bible and the King James Version of the Bible. And that reading was based on Beza saying, well, I fail to see how this could fit. That's not how you do textual criticism. Same thing when you talk about prophets or Isaiah the prophet. Before we came to understand or had discovered enough ancient manuscripts, scrolls, of the prophets to know how they organized the scrolls and had the minor prophets subjugated to the major prophets, and the head of the scroll would be the name of the scroll. Before you knew all that stuff, people are going, well, I just don't see how this fits. Well, that's because you don't have enough information yet. You don't change the Bible because of your ignorance. And when we discover it historically, then you stop doing it. So there is no excuse at Luke 2:22. None. There just isn't. And so if you're sitting there and you're reading Luke 2:22 going, well, I'm glad I've got confidence now in my Bible. I don't have to worry about textual criticism anymore. Okay, there you go. What can I say? And I don't do this to engage in genetic fallacies or anything else. But this is the same reasoning that Steven Anderson uses. It is. Want to prove it? Well, okay. Now, before I do this, because I've had this queued up, I don't know how many times now. Steven Anderson of Faithful Word Baptist Church in Tempe, Arizona, did a 10-part video series in response to my book, 24 years after it was published. 24 years after it was published. And yes, the trash bin was emptied. You just about jumped right out of your skin. That's pretty good. I'll have to remember to do that again sometime. And yes, this is the very same Steven Anderson who, as I mentioned on the last program, was banished from the EU, from the Netherlands, but from the European Union as a whole, from mainland Europe. Just a few weeks ago, he had announced he was going to be coming over to do some series of revival preaching and so on and so forth. So he was banished from there, and then has now been, for the first time, let me read this to you. An Arizona pastor who has said he prayed for the death of former President Obama and praised the 2016 mass shooting at Florida's Pulse nightclub has become the first person banned from entering Ireland, according to the Irish Times. Irish Minister for Justice Charlie Flanagan, that's an Irish name, signed an order under the Immigration Act of 1999 forbidding the entry of Stephen L. Anderson, pastor of Faithful Word Baptist Church in Tempe, ahead of a visit to Dublin that Anderson said he had scheduled for May 26th. His visit's purpose was to preach to an unspecified congregation, according to the newspaper. It was the first exclusion order signed since the law was enacted. 20 years, and Ireland has never kept anyone out until Steven Anderson decided to visit. Anderson made national headlines in 2009 when he prayed for Obama's death, as well as after the 2016 Pulse shooting, which he said resulted in 50 fewer pedophiles, and has repeatedly said the Bible calls for the execution of gay people. Anderson has also produced videos promoting Holocaust denial and claiming the Jewish Messiah is the Antichrist. He has been banned from several other countries, including the United Kingdom, Malawi, South Africa, Canada, Jamaica, and all other European Union countries. Before the order was signed, numerous Irish LGBTQ rights groups had called for Anderson to be prevented from entering the country. Over 14,000 people had signed a petition calling for Anderson's banning as of Sunday evening. Now, no one has any desire that I know of to defend Steven Anderson's wild-eyed, insane behavior. The problem is that he's an easy target, but it won't be long until the same thing is happening to all of us who have never done any of these things, who never prayed for Obama's death, who never commented about the Pulse shooting the way that he did, who obviously recognized that Holocaust denial is only for insane people and flat earthers. This kind of stuff. None of that is really why the LGBTQ people were doing what they were doing. And if they can put together a petition to ban him, it will not be long till they're putting up a petition to ban all the rest of us who refuse to join their revolution. And so it was not very long ago that Anderson's bank, was it Bank of America? I thought it was Bank of America. That's my recollection. I could be wrong, but I think it was Bank of America. Simply closed down his accounts and sent him a cashier's check for what he had in his accounts. And I don't know all the reasons why, but it sounds like it was, we don't want to be associated with people like you. And if that was it, now if there was other reasons that I don't know about, if there were shady dealing stuff, I've not heard a word of that. But the point is that totalitarian. And every single day brings further evidence that these people, it was over 20 years ago that I began saying that homosexuals did not want equal rights, they want uber rights. And I was obviously not even getting close to the full truth of that. It's not just uber rights, it's you must celebrate us. You must celebrate who we are. You must denigrate who you are. And so these totalitarians want to shut down anyone on the other side. And so I don't think that it's right that they have the right to shut down your bank account. I do not think it is. And even in this situation, we know exactly why Anderson is being banned. And it's real easy for us to go, ha ha ha, fine. The problem is it's going to happen to us a lot sooner than we expect it to. I've been in Dublin over the past couple of years. I've been in Belfast over the past couple of years. I was just in Amsterdam. And the time is going to come without any Holocaust denial, without the videotapes. I mean, I saw a videotape that was put up in Holland while I was there about this. And it was easy to string together a pretty impressive amount of woohoo. And it was in English, even though it was subtitled in Dutch. So it was easy for me to follow. And they even put the section in there where he was getting tased. So he's, screaming on the thing just to make it sound all the crazier. Well, what's really crazy from these people's viewpoint is not just his excesses, but his fundamental unwillingness to join their revolution. And that's what they're going to get us for, too. That's what's coming our direction. It's not going to be long. It's not going to be long until this stuff is happening to us. So we report the news, but then have to say it's a real tough situation. I fully understand why you don't want someone like that coming into your country. I get it. But isn't it better to defeat them in dialogue and debate than it is just simply to, you can't, well, eventually they'll try to block them on the internet too, but I don't know if it's possible. So I don't know. It's a very concerning thing. So like I said, Anderson did a series of 10 videos in response to my book. We have responded to the first 3 chapters worth. And I've been trying to get to the 4th chapter, and I just keep not able to get to it, and so I want to get to at least some of it. But I want you to listen to what is said here, because the connection I was making is he's making a lot of the same type of arguments that the TR only guys do, and they try to differentiate themselves from King James onlyists to try to push them away. Those are wacky, crazy people. We're just confessional Reformed guys doing in-depth study. Da 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 da. But the fact is, when you hold to a position that Erasmus never would have held to, that Robert Estienne never would have held to, that Beza would not have held to, you have to recognize something else is going on, and it's a troubling thing. So let's take a look, see if we can get through the part that I've got marked up here, and I'll go ahead and. No, he talks fast. I'll have to leave it at normal speed, and we'll just see how far we get.
Karl Barth and many others, and to a certain extent.
Okay, it would help if I was at the right one. There we go. They both start with red. So that was actually the other thing we'll get to eventually, and that is looking at the reforming apologetics thing. But that sounded not anything like Stephen Anderson. Let's try this one again.
1516, and that he had limited resources, and that he was in a hurry. He only looked at a half dozen Greek manuscripts, and
he's talking about Erasmus here.
Was just trying to get it out the door, and yada, yada, yada. But here's the thing. He also mentions that Erasmus followed it up with another edition in 1519, 1522, 1527, and 1535, and then he died in 1536. So the fact that he was in a hurry on the first edition, or had errors in the first edition, or only had access to a half dozen manuscripts on the first edition, isn't relevant because of the fact that there are 4 other editions after that where he had the time to go through and correct things and fix things and clean it up. Not only that, but...
Now, this is the whole point. That's not what happened. That's not what happened. It's logical. And obviously, if I were to... And it wasn't my intention to write a whole history of the Textus Receptus. I only had one chapter I was able to do it in. But I would want to expand upon this in any future discussions of this. But it's logical to think anachronistically here. What do I mean by that? We would think that when you put a book out, if your first edition, you rushed it out, that the second edition, people would send you stuff, and we're assuming the ability to exchange information like we have. We're thinking everybody's running around with one of these things, where you can take pictures of things and send them to people, and I love watching people's faces when I activate Google Translate on this when we're overseas and they haven't seen this, and it'll live translate a menu right in front of you. It'll literally change what you're seeing through the camera. So the menu is in Dutch, and it's showing it to you in English. Now, it's very frequently very humorous English in the process. But the point is, we think anachronistically with this kind of ability. That wasn't there. And there were very, very few other people who could even begin to interact with Erasmus's stuff. And his focus was on the Latin. He was only rather unwillingly dragged off into the Greek. And so Anderson thinks there's this purification process and all these people are... No. The fact is that certain of these readings, especially in Revelation, because there was a functional bias against the book of Revelation, it's almost viewed as deuterocanonical, similar to the early church in some ways. But you had mistakes made that would not be recognized for literally in some instances 150, 200, 300 years. And people were not checking it out. Even the King James translators were not making reference in any serious, in-depth way to handwritten manuscripts in doing their translations. They're dealing with published texts. And so they've got the editions of Erasmus. They've got the editions of Robert Estienne, Stephanus. I'm looking forward to getting my 1550 Stephanus back, because that's his third edition, and that's the one that has the first extremely partial textual critical apparatus in it, in the margins. And Beza was very dependent upon that. He really utilized that, even though it was completely partial. And even though he didn't realize that the one big codex that he had, Beza Cantabrigiensis, D, the Living Bible of the Early Church, was already cited by Stephanus as one of his manuscripts, manuscript Beta. He didn't realize that. So there are times he thought more than one manuscript had one reading when it was actually the same manuscript being cited twice, and he was in error about it. So this kind of stuff's going on. And so we anachronistically think about how a book would be edited today. This information was so rare, so hard to get hold of. There were no compilations of manuscripts. There was no single way of referring to manuscripts. There was no catalog system. And so the process that Anderson logically assumes took place didn't take place. You know, we mentioned before the humorous fact that for the second edition, Erasmus wrote to the printer and said, go use that. An edition had been printed since the first edition by someone else. He said, use theirs in the book of Revelation and fix my errors in the book of Revelation, not knowing they had used his in the book of Revelation. It was like no one wanted to invest any meaningful time. It's a little bit like Jerome, when Jerome was instructed by Pope Damasus to translate what we would call the deuterocanonical books, the apocryphal books, that Roman Catholics call deuterocanonical, we call them apocryphal. And he didn't really want to, because he realized they were not viewed by the Jews as canon scripture. And you can sort of tell that it wasn't done all that well. It was sort of like, oh, okay, fine. That's sort of how Revelation was treated at this time frame. So no, there wasn't this purification process going on and all the rest of that kind of stuff. That wasn't what was happening. And so Anderson assumes it. The facts are otherwise. And so the relevance of my having stated the rushed nature of the first edition remains relevant.
Literally almost 100 years have gone by since that first edition of Erasmus's Greek text in 1516. So there was no press for time. There was no, we got to hurry up and we only have a couple manuscripts. No, Erasmus traveled all over Europe looking at manuscripts. He had access to way more manuscripts for his subsequent editions.
Such as, and again, why do you think that his focus was on the Greek text? Obviously, Anderson assumes this. That's a logical assumption. It's an errant assumption. That's not where his focus was. So what are these manuscripts? Where does he cite them? What's the evidence of this? The argumentation, Codex Montfortianus is eventually presented to him, but that's from 1520. That's a text that was literally written simply to refute him.
Stephanus and Beza looked at a lot of manuscripts. The King James Bible translators themselves.
The King James Bible translators themselves did not. They looked at printed texts. They did not collate, do any fresh collations or anything like that at all. And even when you do look at what Beza was looking at, he is almost completely limited in his comments to the small selection of manuscripts that Robert Estienne had that are found in the third edition of the 1550 Stephanus that I have. That's pretty much all he's using. And that is in no way representative of the kind of data that we have access to today.
Had access to a multitude of manuscripts. So to sit there and say, oh, well, the first edition of Erasmus had these problems in it, who cares? The King James Bible translators did not translate from his first edition. So he just sets that up as a straw man over and over again. Look at all these problems in the first edition. Well, not relevant. There's plenty of time to get the kinks worked out over the course of literally almost 100 years.
And see, this is the hope. This is my text, the Textus Receptus, and so I'm going to hope that this happened. I'm not going to provide evidence, but I'm going to present the most hopeful case that I can, that something actually fixed the problems.
Okay. Now, there are about 5,800 Greek manuscripts that have survived until now. Manuscripts, of course, are handwritten documents. So there are 5,800 of them. Some of them are complete. Some of them are just fragmentary. But out of these 5,800 Greek manuscripts, if we just look at them and just take what the majority of those 5,800 manuscripts say in any given verse, that's called the majority text.
Basically. And if we follow that, then as we just saw, you're going to have to change the King James rendering at Luke 2:22 and other places. Are you willing to do that? Once you encounter someone who says, no, I will not change the King James rendering of the TR, or I will not change the TR in light of overwhelming evidence, now you're talking about not a preservationist, but a traditionalist. That's what they are.
Okay. Now, the King James Bible translators, nor any of these other guys, Erasmus, Stephanus, Beza, and all the different translators into other European languages, they didn't just blindly follow the majority text, but rather they examined it and tested it and came up with the Textus Receptus, which is 99% following the majority text, but sometimes deviates from it. Now, why would they deviate from it? Okay. Why not just blindly follow the majority text all the time?
Well, this is assuming that they would have had any possible way of knowing what the majority text was, and they did not. This is, again, where anachronism comes in. We're looking backwards. It's very easy for us to assume knowledge on the part of people in the past that we take for granted today, but that they did not possess. How would you have known what the majority text was? Of the 5,800 that are known today, any one of these men might have had access to or knowledge of 25? 50 at most? Out of 5,800? So you're talking 2, 3%? How would you know what the majority was? You wouldn't know what the majority was. So all the argumentation about majority textism or even Byzantine text type, any of that stuff, total anachronism when you're talking about the King James translators. They don't know anything about this. They couldn't. That knowledge had not yet come to exist. So, why even go there? Well,
so for example, 1 John 5:7 is not in the majority of Greek manuscripts, but it is in some Greek manuscripts, and it did make its way into the Textus Receptus. Why? Well, because of the fact that there were a whole lot of writers in the 4th century, 5th century that referred back to this verse as being there. So even... That is not why the Comma Johanneum entered into the 3rd edition of Erasmus. And the thing is, I narrated this in the book, so he knows differently. That is not why it's there. It is there because of the fact that it made its way into the later form of the Latin Vulgate. And even though it is not a part of the Greek manuscript tradition, the very, very late manuscripts that do contain it, almost all contain it coming from the Latin, not as a native part of its text.
Most of them are diglots. Some of them come after the printing of the Textus Receptus, actually, or at least Erasmus's editions. It's there primarily because of Codex Montfortianus, which was written in 1520. Now, people today try to defend the comma by making reference to similar language and just assuming that came from that, like Cyprian. Yet, even Cyprian's words are much better read as not a citation of 1 John 5:7, which again is an anachronism. There wasn't even a 1 John 5, just somewhere in 1 John. But as an interpretation, understanding of what is being stated. There's no reason to take it as a citation at all. And so the process whereby the Comma Johanneum, 1 John 5:7, ended up in the King James Version of the Bible is primarily due to a monk writing out a not very well done manuscript of the New Testament that it includes it, but in a different form than it actually appears in the King James Version of the Bible and in the later editions of the Textus Receptus. If you've looked at Codex Montfortianus, it's a different reading. That's why it's there. It's not that the King James translators are sitting around, well, the small group of King James translators that would have been responsible for the book of 1 John, which is, maybe 3 or 4 men at most. It's not like they were sitting around going, the overwhelming patristic argumentation here would be that this verse is present, da-da-da-da-da-da. Again, they don't have access to 95% of the manuscripts of 1 John that we have today. They don't. So it's in their printed text. It's orthodox. Go with it. Go with it. That's the reason. And that's why I say, in all these situations, if what you want to do in textual criticism is to know what John wrote, or what Luke wrote, or what Peter wrote, that gets rid of a lot of stuff that gets in the way. And that pretty much does away with traditionalism. It really does. But a lot of people don't have that as their priority. It's different. It's different. So that's not why it ended up in there at all. So we press on. Oop. Almost skipped a section. Similar color there.
That tells me that there aren't as many Greek manuscripts of Revelation as there are of the other books in the New Testament. If he's got 6 of them and none of them contains Revelation, so he has to borrow a Greek manuscript of Revelation from a buddy. Because the fact is that there are less Greek manuscripts of Revelation than of other New Testament books.
This again is where a lot of us sit around and we see the Holocaust-denying, crazed Steven Anderson. And then we watch these videos and we go, how many personalities are within this man? Because they don't really fit together very well at all. But he is correct. We have fewer manuscripts for the book of Revelation. And what Erasmus borrowed was Reuchlin's. Actually, it was actually a commentary on Revelation. He had to extract the Greek text from a Latin commentary, which made it all the more difficult, the work, and led to numerous errors.
Okay, so the Greek evidence is not as plenteous. Okay, so therefore, when you're working with a book like Revelation, you're probably going to lean on other languages, okay, just to examine which Greek reading you're going to go with.
There's a lot of King James onlyists that would be really uncomfortable with that level of discussion on Anderson's part. I can just see a lot of them sort of sitting back going, well, what's he talking about? It's just the King James Bible. You don't talk about depending on other languages. But Anderson knows how to translate stuff. He knows German. And so, but then when pressed to be consistent about that, collapses very quickly.
The King James Version. Boy, that would be pretty mind-boggling and bizarre and far-fetched, except that it didn't happen, okay? Because of the fact that these guys obviously when they looked at all their better manuscripts of Revelation, and when they looked at all the evidence, and when they spent literally 100 years on it between the efforts of Erasmus.
Now see where the problem here is? See how he's weaving in this purification scenario that did not happen, could not have happened. It's anachronistic, it's erroneous, but he's weaving it into his defense.
Stephanus and Beza and the 54 men who translated the King James Version, you know what? They decided that the text that we have today in the Textus Receptus is the correct text of Revelation.
They did the best they could. There weren't 54 men working on Revelation, the King James Version of the Bible. There was one committee that would have had responsibility for that, and it was probably one of the smaller committees. So there might have been half a dozen. And as far as we can tell, all they are examining would be the Latin Vulgate, Erasmus, Stephanus, and Beza. That's what they have in front of them. As far as I know, I've never seen any evidence that any handwritten manuscript of the book of Revelation was collated, consulted, referred to, utilized by the committee that produced the translation of the book of Revelation. I'm unaware of any evidence of that at all. If Mr. Anderson has something that he would like to present in that vein, I'd be more than happy to see it.
Okay, so these errors that persist in the text, they're not errors at all. They're right, okay?
So the errors aren't errors. They're right because the King James is right. And so if they agree with the King James, then they are right. Has nothing to do with history, nothing to do with how the text came into existence. It cannot be replicated. And isn't this exactly the problem with the TR too? It's just one step farther. If your translation methodology cannot be replicated, and your textual critical methodology cannot be replicated, then you got a problem, because that means you're no longer dealing with the facts and history. You're defending a traditional text. It's obvious with Anderson. It's not as obvious with our modern, even reformed TR guys, but it is the same thing going on.
Okay. James White wants us to believe this far-fetched, unlikely story that Erasmus just goofed up on Revelation and nobody called him out on it.
And that's exactly what happened. That's what we discovered just a couple months ago when, for the first time in my reading, in my understanding, learned, because I had asked the same question, why would obvious errors in the book of Revelation persist into later editions of Erasmus and then into Stephanus and into Beza? Why? And it was because of the fact that Erasmus thought that someone else's work was based on better manuscripts, and he told his printer, follow them. They had followed him. They had the same text. So we can assume that the printer did what he was told to do and went, it's the same thing. There's nothing to fix. So print it. And so Erasmus figures that's cool. And the book is not the focus of people's attention at this time frame. And people are not running around with Greek manuscripts of it to be able to check it out. The assumption is that there were people that were doing that. There weren't. There weren't. That's the problem. And so, yeah, there were mistakes made by Erasmus that would not be detected for 200-300 years. There were mistakes made by Beza that would not be detected for 200 or 300 years. 200 or 300 years. Especially in Revelation.
Stephanus, Beza, 54 translators, they all just went along with it. No, folks, they looked at the evidence And the revelation, as we have it today, is correct. It's right. Now,
It's not what happened. Not even according to Erasmus. Not even according to Beza. This is just wishful thinking. It's the right one. We can have absolute confidence, even if we can't give you one little bit of argumentation to actually substantiate it. It's the right one.
okay. For example, in Revelation 14:1,
Here we go.
it says in the King James, "And I looked, and lo, a lamb stood on the Mount Zion, and with him 144,000, having his father's name written in their foreheads." Okay. Well, in the New American Standard Bible, representing the modern versions, it says, "And I looked, and behold, the Lamb was standing on Mount Zion, and with him 144,000, having his name and the name of his father written on their foreheads." So this is the reading that James White wants us to think is authentic. You know, this is one of his many examples.
This is the reading of all of the Greek manuscripts. This is the reading that everyone at the Council of Nicaea would have seen. This is the reading that everyone at the Council of Constantinople or Chalcedon would have read. This is the reading that by any scholarly standard represents what John wrote. Okay? And in the transcription from the one manuscript of the book of Revelation, an error was made, a simple homoteleuton error in transcription that then becomes the basis of Erasmus and hence everybody else. And here's the danger. Here's Anderson. He's going to make a whole argument, even done a whole video against modalism based on what his interpretation of Revelation 14:1 in the King James is. This is doing textual criticism on the basis of your theology. What did we do at the beginning of the hour? We saw Beza do the exact same thing at Luke 2:22. The exact same thing. Oh, but Beza is a scholar and Anderson isn't. Okay, but they're using the same methodology. Beza says, I can't see how that can fit. Anderson says, I can't see how that can fit. That's not how you do textual criticism. And once you start down that road, there's no stopping place. There is no stopping place. That's how Joseph Smith did textual criticism. That's why we have the inspired version of the Bible. That's why we absolutely have to have as our commitment, we want to know what Luke wrote, what John wrote. Don't give me this later church providential preservation stuff. You need to know what was originally written. That is the goal. That's the issue.
From the book of Revelation of just, I can't believe that Erasmus didn't fix this mistake. I can't believe that Stephanus and Beza didn't catch this. I can't believe that the 54 brilliant scholars who translated...
You're starting to get the pattern now? As if all of these people had even access to information to be able to examine it had they wanted to do so. There's no evidence that they did. They didn't have the information. There's no evidence they wanted to. And there wasn't, again, 54 scholars looking at Revelation. There was a small little subgroup. So this sounds great if you want to continue to believe something. And that's what I hear in the TR stuff too. I want to continue to believe this. So I'm going to find, hey, have you read the commentary that John Gill gave on this? John Gill wasn't a textual critical scholar, first of all. And God bless him and thank him for a lot of the stuff that he did, but that's not going to tell me what John originally wrote. And if you're spending a bunch of time on that, you're a traditionalist. Just admit it. You don't care what John originally wrote. You care what you've got in your traditional text.
King James didn't catch this error. He wants us to believe that in Revelation 14:1, it's supposed to say that the 144,000 have basically Jesus' name and the Father's name written in their foreheads. Now, you can just read those two, and it's just obvious which one's right. The
just
King
obvious.
James makes way more sense
Oh,
there.
yeah.
The New American Standard is clearly the one that's wrong. And in fact,
Clearly.
I don't want to go into a big, long dissertation on the doctrinal implications of this change, but this is a very bad change that the New American Standard and the modern versions have made. Okay, by adding this, his name and his father's name.
They added nothing. That's what all the Greek manuscripts say. That's what they say. So again, if you're going to dispute this, then you're going to have to say, here's my unique argument for this one. And then I've got a unique argument for that one over there, and another unique argument for that. And I can come up with as many unique arguments as I need to come up with to be able to defend my traditional text. That's how it works. That's how it works. Okay. Well, I only had one other little thing, and it says start here, so that's a good place to do it. So you'll notice the connection. There is a connection. I hate to have to point it out, but there is a connection, and that's why we do this stuff. So there you go. We are going to be back again tomorrow. I don't know. I just don't think I've got time to queue up the material for that Radio Free Geneva. There is I do have some material for an RFG, and but again, that requires not only listening to it the first time, which I've already done, but then going back through and editing it so that you can get to the good stuff without listening to all the bad stuff, which is helpful. I mean, I was skipping, obviously there was stuff there that we weren't listening to that we didn't need to. So I don't know if between now and tomorrow I'm going to have time to do that. We'll see. And if I don't, we might just open the phones. We'll see. But we've got another program to do, and we will be doing that tomorrow. So hope you'll join with us then. Thanks for listening today. We'll see you next time. God bless.